Dragons.
Dragons!
The time of dragons and dragon riders.
Dale. You have to call me Dragon.
You hear the word dragon a lot these days, and depending on who you ask, you either hear it too much or not nearly enough. With dragons showing up everywhere, from blockbuster movies to video games, one debate keeps popping up. Are all these creatures we're calling dragons really dragons? Some fans would say no. According to them, a lot of what we're seeing aren't dragons at all, but something else entirely: wyverns. The difference? It comes down to anatomy. A true dragon has 4 legs and a pair of wings. A wyvern? Just 2 wings and 2 legs.
The dragons in House of the Dragon are not actually dragons. I'm sorry, they're not. They are not dragons, they are wyverns. Completely different mythical creature here, guys. The difference between a dragon and a wyvern is basically the amount of legs they have. So House of the Dragon, get your shit together, either change your CGI dragons, I'm talking about all like 12, 18, however many episodes you have, or change your name. House of the Wyvern, it sounds fine. It'll be good, I promise.
And she's not alone. Plenty of people love pointing this out, eager to share the 2 legs versus 4 fact and push for a more narrow anatomical definition of what counts as a real dragon. But at the same time, no one's out here demanding that Dragon Ball change its name, or to redraw Shenron to give him a pair of wings so he can fit the true dragon mold. Why? Because deep down, we all get it. There are cultural differences in how dragons are imagined. Eastern dragons have always looked different from Western ones. Their traditional dragons have long, serpentine bodies with no wings, and their modern ones change even further. Throughout history, cultures across the world have imagined dragons in wildly different ways. Some breathe fire, while others control water. Some are evil monsters to be slain, others are benevolent deities. And their power? It ranges from local cave nuisance to cosmic force of nature. So, with all this variation, how did we end up with such a rigid anatomical checklist for what makes a real dragon? Well, like most world issues today, the answer can be traced back to British politics. For thousands of years, there wasn't a clear definition of what a dragon actually was, or even a single word for it. One of the earliest recorded dragon-like creatures comes from ancient Mesopotamia. It was a scaled beast with the neck of a snake, the back legs of a bird, and the front legs of a lion. They called it the Ushamgal, which literally means big snake, and it's believed to be the oldest known word for dragon. Interestingly, most modern words for dragon still tie back to the idea of a serpent. The word dragon comes from the Greek word for serpent, wyvern comes from the French word for viper, and worm traces back to old Germanic words for snake. Back then, these terms were completely interchangeable. In fact, one 11th century Icelandic poem uses 4 different words for dragon in just a few lines during the story of Sigurd and the dragon Fafnir. For centuries, the most consistent detail you'd find in medieval bestiaries was that a dragon was the greatest of all serpents. That's it. No specifics on wings, number of legs, or whether they breathe fire. Even one well-known encyclopedist in the early Middle Ages noted that while dragons could have feet, if they did, it was rare. There were absolutely no standards, which led to mass confusion about what dragons were even supposed to look like. And honestly, how could there be? These creatures are imaginary. There's no real-world reference to ground them, so artists, writers, and storytellers just filled in the blanks however they wanted. That's why, across different regions and time periods, dragons could look completely different. It's why even around the same time Vincent was writing about dragons rarely having feet, a town in his own country, France, was calling this 6-footed monstrosity a dragon. And that's fine. I mean, not visually fine, but sure, if you want to call that a dragon, go ahead. A generous way to explain this comes from the heraldry expert who once said, "The dragon is one of the most artistic of creations. It lends itself very readily to the genius of any artist." One way to see this in action is by looking at the artistic depictions of one of the most famous dragon stories in Western culture, St. George and the Dragon. In some versions, the dragon has no legs. In others, it has 2. Sometimes it's got 4, sometimes wings, sometimes no wings at all. Despite being the legendary dragon slayer, St. George is almost never shown killing what we'd now call a true dragon. That's because the classic 4-legged winged dragon didn't start appearing until the 1400s. Before that, the 2-legged variant was the dominant form in art and stories. But back then, all of these were considered dragons. There was no problem with the inconsistency. It was mainly just artistic differences. That was until one tiny island started to base their entire military and politics on the exact forms of these creatures. War is chaotic today, but back then, it was an absolute mess. The standard tactic of medieval European warfare was just a mass charge of the 2 armies' forces, which would quickly dissolve into segmented skirmishes. In this confusion, a flag would become a necessary focal point so that the scattered soldiers of a unit could reform around it. But visibility was everything. The banner had to be distinctive enough to be recognized instantly through the dust, blood, and mayhem of combat. Soon, armies weren't just carrying these symbols on flags, they were painting them directly on their equipment. Most importantly, they were displaying these designs on the linen surcoats worn over their armor, which is literally where we get the term coat of arms. This way, even in the heat of battle, when all sides are encased in similar armor, you could recognize friend from foe. This system was known as heraldry, designed to fulfill the duties of a herald or messenger. Essentially, it was just early branding. Now, this system works great, assuming everyone picks something unique to represent themselves, but you can probably see where this is going. When British forces had their pick of intimidating symbols, most of them went with the same thing: dragons. Despite Christianity painting dragons as evil, they were still the embodiment of power and inspired fear, making them a good choice for military symbols. But if everyone is wearing a dragon, it's like no one is, and the entire point of the system is ruined. Picture yourself on the battlefield, clad in dragon armor, only to be told that your enemies are the ones with dragons, and the reinforcements coming to aid you will also be wearing dragons. I'm sure the stress of that life or death situation won't cause any mistakes at all. So, to fix the problem, they needed not only distinct forms of dragons that could be recognized from a distance, but also new words to describe them. Much like how the Inuit have dozens of words for snow because the subtle differences matter to them, English heraldry needed a similar vocabulary. And, being English, they naturally decided to borrow some of these terms from their neighbors. Thus, dragon was reserved for the four-legged winged kind, wyvern for the two-legged winged variety, and lindworm for the wingless ones. But I cannot emphasize this enough, there was no mythological basis for this split. It was solely heraldic distinction, and it was not followed anywhere outside of the English, Scottish, or Irish armories. The majority of foreign dragons were then considered by the British to be wyverns. This is because the two-legged dragon was the older, more popular variation, and English heraldry is considered to be largely responsible for the four-footed variation in the first place. While the dragon-wyvern distinction truly seems arbitrary, the lindworm definition seems more natural, as many famous Germanic dragons, like Fafnir or Jormungandr, are depicted as wingless. But they don't have to be. Here are 3 different lindworms with varying combinations of legs and wings. 2 of them are depictions of the same myth in the same Austrian town as well, but turn out different. Before the 20th century, this was the most trouble Austrian artists caused. Checking in on other European countries, this Italian dragon was still called a dragon in Italy, but would be called a wyvern by the British. And this French dragon would be called... Okay, this one even confused the British. You want to know something fun? This is actually a different depiction of the same French legendary dragon we've seen before, once again showing how little cohesion there was in these myths. So, okay, maybe we just chose a bad one. Let's get another French example. Let's check out the mid-12th century seal of Raymond de Montdragon. That would surely be better. These abominations are bird-like creatures with human heads and are a far cry from conventional dragons. But the point one heraldic scholar, Denis, makes conveniently right after introducing Mondragon's seal is that in a world with no clear truth as a basis, it is the intention that matters. This complements Fox Davies' previous statement that the form of a dragon is dependent on the artist themselves. A more modern example would be why in the Pokemon world, Charizard isn't a dragon, but somehow these guys are, simply because it's how Game Freak intended. So just to reiterate, before the 1600s, dragons could absolutely have 2 feet. After the 1600s though, only a small corner of the world cared about how many feet a dragon was allowed to have. And it stayed that way for centuries. I mean, how could a tiny island possibly erase thousands of years of traditions from cultures all over the globe? Who did they think they were? The British Empire? This same brand of British nonsense is exactly why my American forefathers decided to rebel in the first place. Okay, to be fair, you could argue that England should at least have some say over the English language and its terminology. But I doubt the people fighting about dragon definitions online are quite as fired up about biscuits and chips. Besides, these terms mostly come up in discussions of heraldry and military history to begin with, and I don't think she's secretly ranking her favorite coat of arms. Honestly, there are probably more people who still keep a MySpace top 8 than could even name 8 different British heraldries. So why do people fixate on these particular details? Since these distinctions originated more from politics than folklore, their mythological foundation is shaky at best. Sure, after the divide, some traits began to be associated with each form. For instance, the four-legged dragon became the official symbol of Welsh royalty, and was therefore often portrayed as more regal, powerful, or intelligent than its two-legged counterpart. But this influence was subtle and limited to specific regions. You might come across claims that said wyverns couldn't breathe fire, or that they had always had barbed tails unlike true dragons. Yet, counterexamples exist everywhere. These features were artistic choices, not fixed traditions. That ambiguity persisted until 2 of the most influential forces in modern fiction tipped the scales, and, whether intentionally or not, reshaped the genre for generations of artists to come. The first is, of course, J.R.R. Tolkien. Smaug is arguably the most influential dragon in modern fiction, reviving many traits from legendary figures like Fafnir. Thanks to Tolkien's immense popularity, these traits have become firmly embedded in the public imagination, and, like much of his work, went on to shape how countless future authors depicted their own dragons. Smaug himself took the form of a four-legged winged dragon, what we now consider the classic true dragon. It's worth noting, however, that Tolkien never treated dragon as a rigid category. He often used the word interchangeably with terms like drake or worm, and his dragons varied wildly in form and abilities, many of which contradict our modern idea of a true dragon. Since these other creatures played smaller roles than Smaug, they were largely forgotten, leaving his archetype as the lasting image in popular culture. Building on that image, but taking it in a more systematic direction, the hierarchy of dragons and the widespread use of the term wyvern was introduced by the other great influence on modern fantasy, Dungeons & Dragons. In the game, true dragons are rare encounters, formidable boss monsters usually reserved for the climax of a campaign. But since no fantasy adventure feels complete without dragons, and because it was still a game that required more frequent, manageable challenges, the creators added lesser dragon-like creatures to fill that role. The true dragons in Dungeons & Dragons were depicted as four-legged, winged Western dragons, but with godlike powers more in line with those found in Eastern myths. For lesser dragons, the D&D team, as usual, drew on historical and mythological research. They took the heraldic wyvern and reimagined it as a weaker, dragon-related creature. The design retained its 2 wings and 2 legs, but its fire-breathing ability was deliberately removed. Instead, its elemental damage was replaced with poison, which does align with some dragon traditions prior to the widespread association with fire. However, this was achieved by transforming the wyvern's occasionally barbed tail into a venomous, scorpion-like stinger, a feature that, as far as I can tell, does not appear in any sources before the game's publication. This decision, made explicitly in the game manuals, firmly separated true dragons from wyverns in fiction that followed. While most people have never actually played Dungeons & Dragons, chances are their favorite fantasy author, or their favorite author's favorite author, probably has. After all, D&D is less of a rigid tabletop game and more of an interactive, free-flowing story, which naturally appeals to writers. Over time, elements like the monster definitions made their way off the table and into novels, shaping the fantasy worlds people came to love. And when it comes to something people love, well, they tend to get a little heated about it. Remember the girl from the beginning? The reason she's so passionate about this distinction and so eager to attack Game of Thrones is because she's a fan of the Fourth Wing series, where that difference actually exists.
As someone who has read a great book series right now, like Fourth Wing, I'm talking about you, there are dragons and there are wyverns in it. And you know, they are not the same. The book makes it very clear.
Now, I don't know where the author Rebecca Yarros first came across the term wyvern, whether through D&D, another fantasy series, or her own historical research. She hasn't exactly been returning my calls. But honestly, it doesn't matter. In her fictional world, she draws a clear line between dragons and wyverns, and that's perfectly valid. What I think she'd agree with, though, is that her definition isn't universal, and it doesn't erase other authors' interpretations or the myths of entirely different cultures. I don't even think Tolkien, who essentially created modern fantasy staples like hobbits or orcs, would have the right to dictate how these creatures are portrayed or defined in other people's works. And that's even more true when we're talking about a creature with thousands of years of variations across hundreds of cultures. Myths are messy, and expecting a clear criteria for an imaginary creature as widespread as dragons would mean getting centuries worth of cultures across the globe to agree on a single definition. And let's be real, we don't even have a universally agreed upon definition for something as basic as fish. And those actually exist. Well, at least I'm pretty sure they do. When people insist that a clear definition exists, what they're really saying is that everyone should follow the rules of some minority's viewpoint, whether that comes from one region's medieval heraldry, the mechanics of a tabletop game, or the novels of their favorite author. I don't think this is ever malicious. It's usually just a mix of wanting to share an interesting fact they've picked up and a subject they feel passionately about. And their definition is probably valid, but only within a very particular historical or fictional context. The truth is, there has never been a one-size-fits-all definition of a dragon. In fact, the oldest and most widely accepted way of identifying one seems to be this: draw something and call it a dragon. That's it. Whatever form they take, as long as they embody the spirit of this shared mythos, there's never been any stricter requirement. 2 legs or 4, wings or none. Whether they're imagined by Rebecca Yarros, George R.R. Martin, or, heaven forbid, even the French, no one has the authority to universally dictate what a dragon must look like. I realize this is a somewhat vague notion that's hard to rally behind, and uniting people usually works best when there's a shared enemy. So, let me put it another way. My fellow patriots, we may not have been alive to toss their tea into the Boston Harbor or sail across the Delaware, but today, we are called to continue the battle for freedom. The British Empire may have fallen, but its embers still smolder. The very banner of free speech, for which our forefathers fought and died, has been singed once again. Yes, a strict definition of dragons may seem small, but a fire that starts small can spread unchecked. And where could be a more insidious first spark than within our very imaginations? This is not just a call to Americans, but to all who have ever felt the shadow of British control. By recognizing the dragons of Skyrim, Westeros, and countless other worlds for what they truly are, we strike back. We defy those who chain our creativity and reclaim our stories. So rise, my friends. Take stand firm in the defense of imagination. Let us deal one final blow to the ghost of colonial rule, and let us declare, once and for all, that dragons in all their forms are free. And so are we.